So, welcome back to Conversations from the Classroom, and this is episode four of our very popular and really demanding and intricate conversations that we're having that really hold our participants on the edge of their seat. But I've Ian Corbett here today to talk to us a little bit about Grow and Love, and Ian is fairly recently qualified from PATS and is out teaching in schools and is currently on secondment with the INTO, doing some work with them. But I'll pass you over to Ian and he can give you a more detailed, I suppose, synopsis of where he's been, where he's going and what's he at now. So Ian, if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself to all the students.
Yeah, thanks for David, and thanks, Cora. So look, my name is Ian, and I'm a teacher at St. Noctis National School in Six Mile Bridge in County Clare. So I was there for my first 2 years after coming from PATS. Then I went over to the States for 3 or 4 years there, and I was teaching in Sacramento in California and over in Indianapolis in Indiana. And there I kind of took on the ACE program there, the Teaching Fellows program through the Alliance for Catholic Education at the University of Notre Dame. And since then I've come back and I was teaching as well in Six Mile Bridge National School again for a further 2 years. And as you said, David, there, I've been kind of working with the INTO this year, kind of advising teachers around their rights, entitlements, and yeah, it's been a different kind of world, but a huge learning experience for me too.
Brilliant. I'll tell you what sticks out for me in my mind is 6 Mile Bridge. I'll never get 6 Mile Bridge out of my head. My home club, Grey Ballycallan. I remember on a road to getting to a Club All Ireland final back in the noughties. I remember we managed to get by 6 Mile Bridge, and I can still remember the stories coming up to it. It was really, the weather was horrible, coming up to it. And I can remember that people used to be saying that the boys at 6 Mile Bridge used to be throwing the hurling balls in buckets of water to try and get used to the wet ball. I nearly cried laughing. I still laugh about that today, but it's a beautiful part of the country, in fairness. Many hurling heroes came out of 6 Mile Bridge, to be fair. That's what I said, as a Kilkenny man with tongue in cheek. But it's great to have you here. And thanks a million, Ian, for giving us the time. I think you're being fairly nonchalant about it, but I know how busy you are. So I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to the students today. It's brilliant to hear how great you've got on since you graduated. It's brilliant. We're all very proud of you here. I was in DCU for getting on so well, in fairness, and I said, we hope, and we know that many students watching this will get on to do great things too. And you're still at the very start of your career as well, which is brilliant. So it's all greener pastures ahead. But I suppose today, what came across with a lot of with our engagement with students, I think that they can be worried a little bit about teaching religious education, and even though they might be positive about some aspects, some of them can worry that they might know enough, or they might know enough about religion in general, but let alone Christianity. And I suppose they're always kind of taken by surprise about how informative and useful and user friendly Grow and Love is. And I suppose what we're hoping to really have a chat with you today is, and what was your experience going out, teaching Grow and Love for the first time? And did you have any worries or anything going into it, and that you were looking forward to, even from your own school days, or anything about going and doing?
No, absolutely. I suppose with Grow and Love program, it came with huge positives, but also a lot of apprehensions too, and areas which I suppose myself just very unsure about. I know I started off teaching with the LIVO program, and I think the Grow and Love program then became a really welcome resource, something which really needed. And I think the approach that it brings, like the kind of the look, learn, live kind of process, kind of like your life, faith, life approach was hugely helpful. And I think not only for the kids, but just for me as a teacher, because it allowed me to become, in the best sense possible, a little bit more vulnerable. It allowed me to kind of express my who I was as a person, my individuality, and my faith a little bit more. And I'm a huge believer in your faith can't be something you just put in a box, put in a shelf and leave there for a while. And I think the Grow and Love program for me allowed me just to kind of begin to live that out a little bit more, show the students who I am, what I believe in. And that created a great sense of enthusiasm and belongingness and confidence among the students, not only among them, but among as myself as a teacher too, in that process. Now, granted, huge apprehensions coming into it, what if I don't know this? What if they're going to ask these questions and I don't know the answers to it? And that's the beauty of it, because it's through that process that you don't actually, it's not best learning that you and your students are going to have too, and then you engage that conversation. I think that's one thing as well, going through the Grow and Love process, that I'm a huge advocate of, is we learn best through conversation, through talking. I think the Grown Up program then promotes that really, really well. So it's again, it's looking at what we're going to learn. It's applying it then and learning about it, whether it's through a gospel story or whether it's through values that you're teaching, to the fruits and gifts of the Holy Spirit if you're teaching confirmation. But it's not just stopping it there. It's having a conversation about how are we going to take what we have, what we're looking at, what we're learning about, but how we're going to apply it to our own lives. And again, it's going to be different. So like if I'm looking at the gifts and fruits of the Holy Spirit, how am I going to live that out when I leave that classroom today? And how are the students going to live those out when they go out into the playground or when they go home? Another part of the Growing Up program I really, really like, and it's something that I was kind of worried about, is inviting parents into the process. I think parents, again, are the third leg of that stool. Like you have your school, you have your kids and their students, and then you have the parent side of things. So like, how do you invite them? And again, it has to be an invitation. They have to be brought into the process. And I think the Growing Up Again program gives kind of a really good structured approach for that, so that when you do let them go home with whatever you've kind of gone through that day, that they again continue that conversation when they go home as part of their work. And again, it's not a chore, it's not something that's onerous on the kids, but it's something that they genuinely want to do. Now, in saying that, I come from the perspective that I was halfway through the year and they couldn't wait to get involved in it. But it's a slow process from the beginning. You again have to make sure that you're that little bit more vulnerable. You're creating or inviting the kids to join you in that, and you're kind of creating a sense of competence and belongingness in the classroom. And without those kind of two things, like you're really, it's going to be much more difficult to do that. But
Ian, can I interrupt you there? There's good drilling going on in my background, so apologies. Before. I'm just really struck by, you've mentioned twice the vulnerability of the teacher. Do you mind saying a bit more about that? Because I think that's really interesting. And I think you talked about the competence of the children.
So like, there's a couple of things that I hold dear to my heart. And I think the first thing, and no matter what I do for the very beginning of the year, I let the kids know what my strongly held convictions were. And I'm a huge believer in prayer. And I think that's the way I started. And I didn't start off with just a big, huge prayer that we had to learn off by heart. I just started off with the sign of the cross. And it's amazing, having taught 5th and 6th class, how many of them don't know how to bless themselves. And just, it's not really coming down to like, it's not coming down to it's coming down to prayer, but it's coming down to like the why we do what we do. Why are we praying? And then when we come down to like making the sign of the cross and talking about the Trinity and doing a deep dive into that, it becomes more real for them. Again, for me, I began to open myself a little bit more to the students, to like my love of music and how much I love music and how that can be used as a type of prayer too. I began to explore that a little bit more. I began to then, as time went on, open myself and show them how passionate I was about Mass and how important Mass is and how we're kind of building up to the Eucharist. And again, for a finish, we were going to Mass every second week. We're going down there and we're letting the kids go around and ask those questions, those burning questions that they always had, but no one's able to ever to answer, or maybe they never got the opportunity to ask. So it's about opening yourself and the beliefs that you have. And you might start off very simple about, here's my favorite parable and this is why. And it could be something as simple as it reminded me of a match that I had, or my grandmother taught me this parable when I was very, very young. But again, you're showing who you are to these children, and you're creating that kind of invitation for them to become part of that and open themselves a little bit more. And granted, they might not have that foundation. They might never have been brought to Mass. But like what I've witnessed over the years is that they always and do still have that burning desire to learn, to be part of that, to want to know more about it. They do have a spirituality within them. It's just about you finding that part of it and lighting that flame.
That's just really interesting to just hear you talk in that way. The drilling is starting again. Because do you see religious education as a particular space in which that vulnerability is more apparent than in other subject areas, would you say?
Absolutely, yeah, without a doubt. It's unfortunate that I think for me, I can often feel isolated. I can feel like an island. My classroom was like a one-room schoolhouse where I will protect that time every day to teach religion and to teach RE, and like oftentimes many teachers, like they'll, like, you do feel isolated, you do feel kind of maybe out of the loop, or you're seen, not necessarily seen as an outsider, but again, I unfortunately can just, I'm very cautious at times that I don't promote it, and really I should be just unapologetic about who I am and what I do and what I believe in. But again, that just takes time. And uh, my very first day, I wouldn't have just stood up on the table and shouted out loud. But gradually over time, people began to realize or recognize that, like, look, Ian does have a good understanding. This is something he really loves to teach, and this is something he really likes to do. And then it's amazing, over time you begin to become involved in different processes within the school or within the community, because people begin to recognize that. But religious education provides that opportunity to become that a little bit more vulnerable for that conversation to happen. And that doesn't happen really as organically in other subject areas, I don't feel. Again, many other teachers, particularly in my own school, might tend to use religious education as that overflow time, that if they do run into, if there is a stimulating conversation going on in numeracy or in maths or in this novel we're doing, we might go into RE time. But for me, it's important to protect that, because that's where the students begin to show their values, can show what they really believe in, what it means to be a citizen, and how their goal might be then to live out the values that we've learned in these particular gospel stories or parables of that. Again, it's creating them just to be better citizens, better people for each other.
That's really interesting, because like there's two things that are after sticking out to me, because in our one of our earlier episodes of this kind of podcast we're doing, Elaine Mann said the exact same thing you said there about vulnerability, but about that honesty of self, like, you know, setting out clearly where you're coming from. You set it out with, like, you know, you're a firm believer in prayer. Do you know what I mean? Elaine set out that, you know, outlines here, I'm a Catholic, I pray, I believe in this, X, Y, Z. And that acted as the basis on which they moved out to form relationships around inclusion and what students wanted to do, what they didn't want to do, what, you know, and it actually was really important to the bedrock of facilitating a really meaningful relationship as regards including kids in RE and trying to find a nice, I suppose, a real life relationship, like, about, you know, I don't want to do this. Okay, that's not a problem. You don't have to do this. I understand why. You understand why I want to. You understand. So you're in that kind of relational space. The second thing as well that kind of stood to me there when you're talking about, you felt like an outsider a little bit in school, because of, you know, you're passionate about RE, and you're right, you're in good company here anyway. We're all passionate about RE, but I suppose, from what I see and what I'm hearing, do you think that RE is undervalued by a lot of teachers, and, like, you know, about what it actually brings, like, to the curriculum as a whole, and what it actually brings to the education of the child? Because I always think back on Patricia Kieran had the phrase, you know, like Catholic schools or schools are places where citizens are educated about religions and beliefs, you know, like, as well, you know, so like your development of citizenship, the development of the citizen, and that remembering that the child in that room before you is a citizen and is going to have to meaningfully contribute to society and all of our ideals and values that we hold in Western democratic pluralist societies. And I suppose, to wind it back, do you think that RE is kind of underestimated or undervalued within, amongst, in your experience so far of teaching, let's say?
It depends on the person massively. I think you do have to have that foundation, or that grow for it from the very beginning, or everybody has that person who has developed or promoted their own spirituality. For me, I suppose it was my grandmother. But if you can identify who that person is, absolutely. But I think for our teachers nowadays, I just think we aren't as informed about RE. I don't think there's the platform there for us to build upon the foundation which we already have, to go from our education, whether it's in Mary or Pats or Forever and Marino or wherever it is, to, like, be able to take the foundation that we have and build in it. Is very much kind of a self-fulfilling journey after that. And if there was and I know there are resources out there through our diocesan advisors and that, but they're very few and far in between, that there isn't that, like, I suppose, scope for us to begin to develop and promote our own maybe spirituality, our own practices within RE. Like if there was a community of practice where teachers come together, like they might have with the PDST in promoting literacy or numeracy or PE or whatever it is, if we could have that community of practice where we come together and do get that intentional professional development in RE, then absolutely, I think teachers would value it so much more. But I think when there is a slight absence, I suppose, of that, we don't value it as much.
I think you're onto a winner there, Ian. I think there's around CPD anyway and religious education. There's definitely a gap there. It's definitely out of line with other curricular areas, I suppose.
I think the only time there tends to be intentional CPD is when there's a new program, or when the new curriculum came in, and that was even haphazard, depending on where you were.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I suppose even when the primary language curriculum came in, like you had your facilitation day, and then you went into your education centre, or they came to you, and then you went through all these webinars throughout the year, and it was a phase-in process. But I suppose like that with Growing Up program, you were there for a day, you got a quick introduction to it, and then it was like off you go, and best of luck. And that was the kind of approach to it, I suppose.
Yeah.
Can I pick up on the you mentioned parents and including parents. Was it senior classes you were teaching mainly?
Yeah, senior classes typically, yeah.
So was it trying to encourage kind of work at home, or did you ever make use of the end of theme prayer services, for example? Was that a resource that you were using, or?
Yeah, I suppose within involving parents, I kind of looked more broadly as well. I looked at the community as a whole too, and I was like, how can we begin to, I suppose, in the first instance, see parents as in their primary role as the educator of the children, and the passing on of faith comes to them in the first instance too. And again, we're promoting and we're helping them out in that process. For me, as time went on, I began to know, I built up a good relationship with the parents. And again, I think that's hugely important as teachers, that we often, when we think of parents, this brick wall comes down and we're like, I'm not going there. I'm not going to touch that. That's a recipe for disaster. But like my very first thing that I did was I sent out a survey to the parents. And again, it was kind of a broad questionnaire about like, who is your child? You know your child best. Who are they? What are their talents? What are their gifts? What are they good at? What's something you want them to improve on? But like I could really gauge from them as well, from the responses, the kind of family that they were going to be, that I was dealing with. And I would always purposely, after I got those back, call every single parent and have a conversation with them and say, look, if there's something maybe throughout the year that you could help out with, or that I can invite you in and maybe chat with the class about, or that, would you be willing to do it? Would you come in? And we kind of built up a really good relationship then as time went on. So I didn't wait until...
I'm already going to the train station and I'm moving the family out to 6 Mile Bridge.
Not there, he's in the INTO.
Give me a ring when you're back there. And I'm moving down. That's unbelievable. But again, like, see what's really wonderful there, even is that, like, it's all about the relationships, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's all about the relationships. And like, it seems like Growing Love kind of taught about those relationships.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, because it sounds like you used the Growing Love model there of the stuff going home and things like this to kind of springboard your conversation. It mightn't have been the original idea, let's say. You probably wanted to engage with parents anyway, but like it definitely presided. It taught about that aspect, I suppose. About the religious aspect and the primary parents.
The very first lesson that was in the Growing Up program was talking about like how we're made in the image and likeness of God. And like one of the first things that I'd always do every year or before any kind of theme in the Growing Up program is like, look, here's a couple of sheets of blank paper or piece of blank paper. Write down your thoughts, your questions, everything you have, and then we'll organize them. But one question or one thing that came up is like my mom or my granny always says that like God is everywhere. How can God be everywhere? Like, what does that even mean? Like he's always like, is he always watching us, or what is it? So like as we went through the Growing Up program, and the first lesson, the first theme about being made in the image and likeness of God and who is God, and like the what we kind of went through was that like how we are made in the image and likeness of God, and God is often the things that we see in the bits and pieces of every day. And like eventually this guy came back to me, this 6th class student, and said, look, what you're telling me so is that like God is everywhere, but he's everywhere in everybody. So when we see somebody showing love or someone being kind to somebody else, that's God acting through them. So that's how we see it everywhere. And like that was the kind of the mic drop moment. I was like, exactly. And we just left it there and we closed the books and we're like, we can't go any further. Like we're just gonna like we just don't want to like that was such a perfect moment in that, like that I was like, that's absolutely it. Like you got it. But again, that wouldn't have come about if it wasn't through that kind of the look, learn, live process through the Growing Up program. That if we hadn't first began to look at this and then began to do a deep dive into like who is God and what is he all about, and then begin to see it being lived out just outside the four walls of the classroom, that guy wouldn't have come to that conclusion. So it was an amazing process in that.
See, that's pretty. See, like we can talk, like Cora does, we can talk to the students up above, in their initial training over and over about the pedagogical, model and all the thing growing up. But I don't think the penny drops until you have moments like that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's important even flagging, like looking at older approaches to RE, like they're very textual based. And they're moving very much towards the intellectum, a lot of the time, more than actually trying to get that head, heart, and hands going. Was it so? Like Growing Up definitely it was like it brought such a clear framework, like building on the curriculum, and moving from the curricular aims and strands, and even for planning, it looks like like it does a lot of the work for planning for you. So really in it, like I think that's probably the dynamic way. Like, have you ever found yourself actually, even just out of interest, like have you ever found yourself working from the curriculum on its own, or have you ever done that? Because it'd be interesting just even to hear if you have or haven't, like, or
I did. I did until Growing Up came along. I did work from the curriculum for the most part. Like when I suppose for 6th class Growing Up only came in last year, and then when I was teaching in 6th class the year previous, I was using the 5th class Growing Up so that they're kind of getting a good induction in that. But through that too, it was kind of 50-50 between like picking things out of Growing Up, and then the other parts of the curriculum was purely based on actually going back to the curriculum itself, like and seeing like, okay, what are the main themes that we need to cover in 6th class. But I also covered it, and I did that in tandem with the students' own questions. Like they were just incredibly inquisitive and always wanted to know more and more. And that really fed into their spiritual kind of inquisitive, like just how curious they were. And it was about taking those questions in the curriculum and creating something for the students in that aspect, as well as using the 5th class Grow and Love program at that time too.
Yeah, because like Anne is always very good at it up above when we're talking, Cora, isn't it, about that critical dimension, that comes before the that seems isn't
judgment, the critical judgment at the end. Yeah.
That isn't explicitly mentioned in Grow and Love, but it's captured there. What Ian is saying about like the importance of questioning, and I think there can be an apprehension in teachers' thoughts to be, oh God, what if I'm asked this, or what if my nanny died, is she in heaven? Like and the curveball questions as well, like and like people can be afraid of the questions, but I think what's coming out strongly from my gathering, my listening to you, Ian, is that like you shouldn't be afraid of the questions, and it sounds like it's okay not to have the answer, but just to encourage them to continue with the question. Like that's a very interesting question. Like I wonder, did you ever, we should think about that a little bit more, and just kind of unpack it, or even it doesn't have to arrive at a definitive answer, even like.
And like, look, I'm a firm believer in like in this practice of like the less talking you do, the more learning that's done. Like particularly from the side of the teacher, like if you can create that conversation in the classroom, again, students might throw out the greatest question ever. but like it's very rare that I will answer it like straight off the bat. Like I will go back and I'll say, look, like that's a really interesting point of view. Has anyone got something else they'd like to add to it, or something you like to amend or change, or a different approach that you might have? And it's incredible. Like the question answered before they even know it, without me having to say a word. But it's generally through their own just conversation. Again, it comes back down to the relationships in the classroom. It comes back down to how you do it initially. If you can create that kind of culture of trust within your classroom, and that comes down to, again, being vulnerable and showing who you are. And when the kids can do that too, they trust each other, and trust that they can answer the questions, and trust that they don't have to censor what they say. That like, look, I'm going to ask this question, whether it's right or wrong, or I don't know the answer, and we'll tease it out and we'll see where we go with it. One question could take a full 40 minutes, but there's incredible learning in that, not just within the RE aspect of it, like, but just themselves as people, like trusting each other with that, and having the respect to, and respecting each other when having that discussion too.
I'm loving that, Ian. I'm loving the trust part, because all this comes back into my mind is always, you know, like that the etymology of faith, you know, credo and love. So to love God, like we're actually talking about trusting God, to put trust in. So you have that kind of to move forward, and that's even within, because it comes back to that relation aspect, John. To be in relationship with someone is to be that vulnerable person that you outlined, John. The teacher being vulnerable, there's an element of it, because you can't be in a meaningful relationship if you're not open to the other. That's not a relationship, that's just an interaction. And there's a difference. And like what sounds really powerful there is that you're allowing and you're putting back the child again to leading their questioning, to leading their education and learning process, and you're almost acting like a composer, composing and coordinating and facilitating the conversation and bringing it about. Because I think what can happen sometimes is with all of this, the emphasis on planning, it can be very much, I need to get this covered, I need to get this done, I need to get this lesson completed, I need to, whereas there's the things that you can plan for, and that's where the real education happens, isn't it? The spontaneity, the spontaneous, the spontaneous thing that can happen, and that's where children burst that into life, don't they?
And like I think their favorite day of the week was often Wednesdays. Like Wednesdays, we kind of it was the week that we weren't going to mass. We would often on Wednesday have a prayer service. So like it was a very, very simple thing. I used to use Sacred Space, or I used to go to use that book, or I used to use any of the children's literacy books I had. And like we would just read reading for that day and read the gospel. And their only task was in their RE notebook was to write down the one line that stuck out for them. And that was our RE lesson for that day. That's where our conversation started. We might just go around and say, like, what's that one line that stuck out for you and why? No, it didn't happen organically. It didn't happen from the very beginning. It took like scaffolding and modeling and showing what this is like. But by the year, like we really had to put a halt to it after an hour and say, stop, like, look, this is amazing. We've English and maths to do as well. But like just the conversations in that happened just from that. And like it would go in so many different directions, but it's amazing how one line can create that.
I'm really struck by you saying there, like, that's more is less, really, isn't it, in RE sometimes, that space for silence, that space for contemplation, and allowing the children to lead it. But that takes huge rootedness on the part of the teacher, doesn't it? And I'm just wondering, where do you think you got that from, or where, like, how did you develop that sense of, to have the confidence to stick with it, to try something out and to learn from it, and not push it, but I'm wondering where that comes from.
Sorry, Corey, you kind of froze there at the end of that.
Yeah, I'm wondering where that confidence or that sense of.
You seem very self-aware, Ian. Like you seem to know who you are and what you're about. Kind of way. And I suppose, like, I don't know, but not in a definitive sense. But
I know,
at this moment in time, like when you're doing something, you seem to know, where you're at. Is there anything that you've done yourself around, like it sounds like you're a reflective person, as to say, like that.
Yeah, just it's through constant failure, I think, basically. Like I'm a huge advocate for just going out seeking things, looking for things, looking how can I make my practice better, and like there has to be some sort of flame within you to go and do that. Like I don't typically hang wait for someone to say, look, that's wonderful, like give it a go. Like I actively go out and see how can I make my practice better. And again, through constant failure, like that was the big thing. Seeing what other people did, having conversations, creating those communities of practice, finding like-minded people, I find is the best way to go about it. If you can find other trailblazers in the area that are really passionate about what you're passionate about, it's amazing what you come up with when you get engaged in conversations with them. And again, like you can't just take what they do really well. You have to kind of talk about and see what they do and see how does this fit into your practice, but more importantly, how does it fit into the kids that are sitting in front of you, and how is this going to work for them? Because what I do on a yearly basis is very different from what I did the year beforehand, because it's a completely different type of class that I get and different students. So again, I have to amend, adapt everything I do. And again, with that, it just takes constant professional development on my part. I suppose personally, maybe again, like I grew up in a very, very typical like Irish home. We went to mass on Sundays and that was kind of it, and it wasn't really talked about. And really, the only reason we probably went there was for social accountability, because the lads down the road would talk about if we weren't there. And
yeah.
But I suppose my grandparents would have been more of an influence on me that way. Like Granny being the sacristan, and me just kind of being by her side a lot of the time, and heading off up to Knock in the back of the Jeep with the sandwiches and the cup of tea, and just being exposed to that as well. I suppose that was hugely helpful. But I think outside of that, you do have to have that fire to want to improve, constantly improve, and to know that like there's so much to learn out there, and just taking enjoyment out of that.
Would you mind talking for a minute about your experience of ACE? Because this is something that our students maybe I know that they're only second years, first years, but this is a program that's an opportunity that's available to apply for. Maybe Ian, you might just for a minute, so that people have it in their heads as something maybe to pitch forward to years to come.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose like ACE, or the Alliance for Catholic Education, is a program through the University of Notre Dame, one of the most incredible Catholic universities, not only in the States, but in the world. And it's, I suppose what ACE is they've got a number of different programs, but I suppose the one that I did was the Teaching Fellows program. And that's a 2-year service project where you were placed into an under-resourced Catholic school somewhere in the United States. There's kind of maybe 30 or so different locations. I was very fortunate then to be placed in Sacramento in California, and I taught there at St. Charles Borromeo Catholic School. So I was there for 2 years. And then what you kind of do then is during the summers, you kind of work towards your master's in education. And you also do a little bit of coursework as well during the year. And again, there's kind of 3 kind of pillars to ACE, or it's the Teaching Fellows program. And that's prayer, education, and community. And then within each 3, then you take a massive deep dive and a critical look at like those 3 areas. Within education, obviously, look at the self-explanatory. You're working towards your Master's of Education, and you get. For me, I learned a huge amount about my own practice through that. And again, going into the program with a BEd, I was at a huge advantage, because most of the people going into the program are coming from different areas. They don't necessarily have an education background. So again, it was a really good kind of, not only just a refresher, but just really topped up a lot of what I had and gave me so much more outside of as well. The community aspect then is really important too. The community aspect, because you're living with other people from the program. It generally could be anywhere from 4 to 7, 8 people, and you're all living under one roof. But the community aspect is really important, and you see that more so during the summers, because you're going to classes with people, you're engaging in social activities with people. You might be heading out to the local bars with them then on a Friday and Saturday night. But like that's a huge part, to really foster that, because without that community, without people kind of backing you up or having your back, look, it's the one thing that I took most from as well through the ACE program. It's just having people there, having the constant confidence to rely on people. And then I suppose the last part then is your spirituality. And again, that's a huge aspect of the ACE program, is developing that. And they do that through providing masses maybe every day of the week. during the summers together. You'll go as a community to the Basilica on campus on Sundays. And again, you go through certain classes which help develop you, develop your spirituality, but develop you as a teacher of RE too, which is massively important. So they really put a big emphasis on those big three areas. But definitely worthwhile.
An amazing opportunity.
Yeah.
Sounds incredible, yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds incredible. Can I apply? Can I apply?
And I think one of the most admirable things is that you maintained your accent. You didn't arrive home.
Oh, no, we never lose it. Yeah.
Some do.
Absolutely, always. Yeah, always. Yeah. No, I'd be disowned if I came back with an American twang, I think.
And what's interesting there, even like there's some core things that came out there, just even in the description of ACE there, even that reflect back into that things you were saying about growing love and RE, like fostering a community and belonging. I mean, the development of your own personal spirituality, linking that back out to how you were going to live and how you were going to bring the lesson in your own life too out to the world. And I think the spirituality part is always very interesting, because we can be impoverished here as in our experience of spirituality at times. And like I can even say myself, like really, like just you have those moments where kind of a spark kicks off for you. And like, and I can still remember two very poignant ones. One was literally out the back looking at the stars. One night was at a wake. It was a very happy, positive experience. And then the other actually was when I was doing my MA, and we were out in Glenstall, and we were doing our cloakroom, and it was like 6 o'clock in the morning mass thing, right? But it wasn't that it was such an informal setting, right? But it was my first time experiencing like real song.
Yeah.
Kind of way, like, and real like, and it's like what you love music, but like so was it Augustine said, if you sing you pray 5 times, and it's that it was that kind of, wow, something is happening here. So something's happening to me here.
Yeah.
And I think through those moments, like you're managing to capture in your classroom, and like through the conversation and nurturing that sense of wonder, and that's the big, isn't it? Because like essentially what RE category does is it tries to introduce you to the mystery of God, and in that mystery there's the ultimate wonder of everything. And if you can, like, if you can only bottle that, it would do wonders for the soul every day. But the moments will happen infrequently. Kind of way, they won't happen every time. But it just sounds like the graw you have for the area made it come alive. So like what you find is that people can talk, like, and what was interesting is we've had conversations recently, Cora, about integration and stuff, haven't we? Like, and saying like there's rarely an RE lesson that you'd ever do that you're not going to be covering a lot of the objectives of literacy.
Yeah.
So kind of way. But I think it can be off the radar for teachers at times about integrating with RE, and the purpose there to see nearly like prayer time or something. I don't know what they think, because I think about it my way. It's something very, very central to what you're trying to do with educating a child and towards that holistic development. But I suppose it sounds like RE is on your radar, you see, as a subject, because you have a graph for it, but also as in you've witnessed the contribution it can make. And the power of the Grow and Love program, because it's simplicity nearly there for its use. It sounds like is that, would I be right in saying that, or
absolutely, yeah, like,
like if I'm gone wrong,
you can see it so readily. Like if you're just walking from your house to the shop, you can see the Grow and Love program taking place in the interactions, in the supermarket, on the GA field. Like it's everywhere and it's anywhere, no matter where you go. So like oftentimes I think a lot of what we teach is just confined to the desk, confined to those 4 walls, but the grown-up program just completely disregards those walls and knocks them all down, and the students go out having, I suppose, what I feel is that flame has been somewhat lit, and they feel that I suppose like a moment of grace that they often come into from time to time as well. And like it's a constant conversation, like it's continuously happening, but it's really down, again, most of the time it's down to the teacher and how they do that. Like if you're learning, like RE is just like a language, like you're not going to learn that language well if you're not immersed in it, if you're not constantly practicing it, if you're not promoting it. Like for me in my practice, like we'll have a virtue of the week, and our virtue of the week is based on the saints that we learnt about that Friday, and we'll have a sanctuary. We'll talk about the saint, maybe the miracles that he and she went through, and the kind of person that this saint was. And we know that a lot of them, they weren't great people, but they did great things. And like, it's amazing for the children to be able to see that like, look at this fella here, he was mad for going off partying, but like he was just not a normal person, like any of us. But the values that this saint then, that he or she embodied, how can we begin to live those out? And then we begin to identify some of the really strong virtues that this saint had, and we pick one for that week. And then every single day we'll go out and we'll try and live out that virtue. And then on a Wednesday, we have a way to go Wednesday. And just for a way for the kids just to keep that virtue in mind, we'll try and pick some people that they saw living out that virtue. And then by Friday, on Friday, they all have to vote for the person who they lived out that virtue the strongest. Now, it's, for me, it takes the place of the students of the week that we have in our school, but we have the virtue of the week, and they have to pick somebody. They lived out this virtue. It might be the virtue of love, and like, why is it that this person showed love? And then we'll link it back to the same that we had the previous week before we jump onto our new one. So just really just putting that into practice and living it out then.
Yeah, like you're describing just so beautifully how it infuses everything that you do. It's not just a half an hour per day that you're doing. It's just, it's a lived reality. And like, I mean, Sophia Cavalletti always talks about the teacher not being on their own in the class, that the Spirit is there with them. And like, you just seem to be so infused by the Spirit, and it animates everything that you do. And I love the way you're describing, you know, that description saying that grow in love, you can see it out, you know, in the community, because I think all too often in church we've devalued family life and devalued, I mean, the sense of community in GAA clubs and in rugby clubs. I have to include that for David. And in any other kind of communal gatherings, families, you know, who aren't necessarily going to church either, you know, it's there. Devalued that and undervalued it, and
that's where I think is really funny as well, Cora. This is like the enmeshment of that kind of fusion. Like I went to St. Kieran's College in Kilkenny, and like there's images up in there, signs before and all that, like, but it was just a regular feature for us, is that, you know, there was mass on like that, like the hurls were all stacked outside the front, like, do you know what I mean, neat as ever, like they're never drawn down, they're all just and then like we even had ceremonies like, you know, the blessing of the hurl and the blessing of the instruments at the start of the year, you know, bringing together, you know, that sport and music and outputs and all that there. But it was, remember, it was even just back to the parish and the home parish, like every Sunday, like the front of the front at the front of the church, the outside front, just hurling bags. Just hurling bags, everyone's trying there. And you know, everyone, like, we all left just after communion because training was starting. And then who'd be nearly down there before us, by the time we get down there, was the PP. he was nearly down there before. But there was such a commitment. So even there at my primary school, I said my school, my primary school was right beside the church. And we went to, even on the Sunday, I was really going to the school nearly again. Like, so I was going to the church, and then we were going down to the pitch, and they were all within, you know, our rocks thrown of each other. It was just part of the whole. It was part of life. It wasn't something that, you know, extremely other that you'd done. It was the everyday. It was the normal.
I think there's almost a reclaiming of that now in this COVID-19 pandemic, where, you know, people are talking about, you know, not being able to go to church and not being able to celebrate the Eucharist and that. But people are seeing beyond that. It's not just the sacraments, it's also the bits and pieces of everyday life that you've described, Ian, you know, the taking the virtue and living it out, and ultimately, obviously, celebrating in the Eucharist, but the bits and pieces first and foremost.
Christ's presence in the gathered assembly, like that's what it's Christ's presence in the community. You know?
Oh, it's been a pleasure chatting.
Thanks for the conversation.
Really great. Like, and thanks so much, Jean, for like everything you're after bringing to this conversation. Like, it's so great to hear you know, it's amazing to hear what you're doing yourself, like in the class, what's actually happening. Somebody, but I think it would be really great for students to hear as well that, you know, it doesn't have to be this drudgery subject. There's so much room and fun, and that students actually enjoy it. So that's the big, you know, like it's not the students enjoy doing it, and that you'll get so much out of them by engaging in it. And like everything that you talked about there, nothing sounds anything at all, because it's not there obviously in category. It sounds absolutely nothing at all like indoctrination, because it isn't. And I mean that in the sense of that everything you're doing is about formation of values, and values that even a non-Catholic will bring with them, you know, out of the country. Like everybody can engage and look at the saints and what you know, the good life is, and the question of what is the good life, you know, and what does the common good even mean, and so how do we contribute to this society as people in coexistence with one another. And that's the whole you know, really magical thing that you're after capturing there, Ian, from the microcosm of the student, teacher, parents, principal, school, community relationship, out to what that student in your classroom, and this is, you know, it sounds, you know, oh, here, but that student could potentially become the president of Ireland. That student could potentially become the first Irish astronaut. That student and with them they'll bring, and that's probably the big, I suppose, responsibility as a teacher, is that, so you really impress, you know, you really press yourself on the person. So you're like, and like you always remember the good ones and you always remember the bad ones, but everybody has an impact. And have a way of shaping you. So it sounds like you're doing such marvelous work there, and it's really brilliant to hear how, you know, I suppose central growing love, the program itself, has been to you actually really manifesting and flourishing as a teacher. It sounds like, you know, actually, you know, I'd even go beyond saying teacher, and I mean, as an educator, so you're really like leading people out of themselves, you know, and it's really sounds brilliant. And thanks so much, Ian, for having this chat with us.
Not at all, no, happy to do it. No, I really appreciate the chance to have the conversation too. I suppose, again, it's not often we get to talk about this, so I often feel like you're nearly like cattle being let out after the winter. You're kind of like, just go at it.
Yeah.
as long as you don't get pneumonia in the shed, Ian, Rory. But I think on that note, we really had a brilliant chat, and I think I'd encourage students watching this now to, you know, just suppose maybe if to go home and think a little bit differently about growing love and about RE. And so think of the potential. We always flag the pitfalls, the challenges, but you look at the potential. Really, you know, the world is your oyster and what you can do, and, you know, don't be afraid to step into that.
And one thing that's standing out for me as well is, you know, the isolation sometimes that a teacher of faith can feel in the classroom, that you're not on your own. There are others like you who living out a faith-filled life, and
like Ian down here. There's loads of people around there, and I think what people often forget as well, Cora, is that, like, if we got an email from a past student, like, we're not going to ignore it. Do you know what I mean? Like, you know, if they're asking for advice or direction and resources or anything like that, so I mean, you definitely reply. So don't lose touch.
We've taken up so much of your time, but that's just been amazing. Thank you.
Not at all, and thanks for the opportunity, guys. No, I really do appreciate it.
It lifts us hugely.
Yeah.
It really does. You know,
it brings it
hard to these things.
What you do.
Yeah. No, so thank you.
Because